The derelict hospital loomed over us, its shattered windows resembling hollow eyes that watched our every move. The building was a husk, crumbling under the weight of its own decay. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but the wall needed those medical supplies. Lila and I were the only ones willing, or stupid enough, to retrieve them. "Stay close," I whispered, barely audible over the soft crunch of debris under our boots. Lila nodded, her crossbow gripped tightly in her hands. Her blonde hair, tied back in a messy braid, was streaked with grime. She didn't speak, her lips pressed into a thin line. We both knew the stakes. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and rot. My flashlight's beam illuminated bloodstains smeared across the cracked tiles, remnants of lives lost long ago. The silence was oppressive, a tangible force pressing down on us. I glanced at Lila, who raised her hand to signal a stop. Ahead, a stretcher lay overturned, its metal frame twisted. Beyond it, a door hung ajar, revealing shelves of supplies. The pharmacy. Relief washed over me for a fleeting moment. Lila pointed toward the door, mouthing, "Let's move." We crept forward, careful to avoid the glass shards and scattered tools that littered the floor. Each step felt like a gamble, the smallest sound threatening to shatter the fragile quiet. The room was intact, the shelves still stocked with bottles and boxes. Lila began filling her bag while I kept watch, my rifle at the ready. "Sonny," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This might actually work." I nodded, but my grip on the rifle tightened. Optimism was dangerous. That's when it happened. A metal tray, precariously balanced on a shelf, tipped over as Lila bumped into it. The clatter echoed through the halls like a gunshot. We both froze, our eyes locking in shared terror. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the howl came. It was inhuman, a piercing shriek that reverberated through the hospital, shaking the very walls. My blood turned to ice. "Lila, we need to move," I hissed, grabbing her arm. She nodded, her face pale, and we bolted from the room. The howl sounded again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable shuffling of feet. The howler appeared at the end of the corridor, its elongated limbs moving with unnatural speed. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, and its gaping maw stretched impossibly wide as another scream tore from its throat. The sound was deafening, reverberating through my skull. "They're coming," Lila whispered, panic creeping into her voice. The moans began, low, guttural, and growing in number. The horde was answering the call. "This way," I said, pointing toward a staircase. We sprinted, the howler's screams chasing us. The stairwell was tight, the air thick with the stench of decay. As we climbed, the moans grew louder, a cacophony of hunger echoing below us. At the top, we burst into another hallway, this one lined with gurneys and overturned filing cabinets. I paused to catch my breath, my chest heaving. "Sonny." Lila's voice trembled. I turned just in time to see the howler lunge. Its claws tore through her chest with a wet rip, sending a spray of blood across the walls. Flesh and muscle peeled back as her ribs cracked under the force. She let out a strangled cry, choking on her own blood as she collapsed. Her crossbow clattered to the floor, useless. "Lila!" I raised my rifle and fired, the shot tearing through the howler's twisted skull. Its head snapped back, dark ichor spraying from the wound, but it didn't stop. It staggered, its body jerking violently as if it didn't know it was supposed to die. Another shot. This time, the creature collapsed, its body convulsing before finally going still. But Lila was already gone. Her lifeless eyes stared at me, her blood pooling beneath her and soaking into the cracked tiles. "Damn it," I muttered, my throat tight. I wanted to scream, to rage, but the howler's death cry had already summoned more. The moans were deafening now, the sound of countless feet growing louder. I grabbed Lila's bag, slinging it over my shoulder, and ran. The hallway twisted and turned, the exit feeling impossibly far. The weight of her death pressed down on me. But I couldn't stop. Not here. Not now. At the end of the corridor, I spotted a window partially boarded up. I smashed through the wood with the butt of my rifle and climbed out onto the fire escape. The fresh air hit me like a slap, but the moans followed, spilling out into the night. I didn't look back. Lila was gone, and the howlers were still screaming. The fire escape groaned under my weight as I descended, each step a gamble against its rusted frame. Behind me, the screams of the Howlers echoed through the night, a chorus of agony and hunger. I didn't dare look back. The horde was coming, and they wouldn't stop until they'd turned this place into a graveyard. Reaching the alley below, I crouched low, gripping my rifle tightly. The street was bathed in shadows, illuminated only by the pale light of a crescent moon. Buildings stood like silent tombstones, their windows shattered and doors hanging ajar. The city felt dead, but I knew better. It was alive with predators. The first shambling figure emerged from the hospital entrance, its decayed body illuminated briefly as it stumbled into the open. Its head snapped toward the sound of a howler's cry, and it broke into a staggering run. Behind it came dozens more, their moans growing louder with each passing second. I moved quickly, but silently, weaving between overturned dumpsters and abandoned cars. Every step was calculated, my boots brushing against the ground with deliberate care. The howlers had incredible hearing, and even the faintest noise could mean death. My heart raced as I ducked into an abandoned cafe, its broken sign swinging in the breeze. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of decay. Tables and chairs were overturned, and the counter was covered in a layer of grime. I scanned the room for anything useful and found a doorway leading to the back. I slipped through, my rifle at the ready. The back room was cluttered with broken shelves and shattered glass, but a faint glow caught my eye. A trail of blood, still wet, led to a storage freezer at the far end of the room. Curiosity gnawed at me, but I hesitated. The howlers were still out there, their cries echoing faintly. Moving toward the freezer felt like tempting fate, but something about the blood trail felt wrong. It wasn't smeared or erratic. It was deliberate. The silence broke with a crash. Something heavy slammed against the front of the cafe, shaking the walls. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Another crash. The howlers had followed me. The freezer door creaked open, and my flashlight caught the briefest glimpse of movement. A hand, bloody, clawed, and grotesquely deformed, shot out and gripped the edge of the door. My pulse spiked as a low growl emanated from within. I backed away slowly, my rifle trained on the freezer. The growl deepened, guttural and wet, as the figure pulled itself into view. It wasn't a howler. It was worse. Its body was bloated and twisted, its skin stretched taut over bulging muscles. Its head twitched unnaturally, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of jagged teeth. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, it roared, a deep, guttural sound that shook the walls. "No," I whispered. The sound shattered the silence, and the howlers outside responded instantly. Their screams rose in a horrifying crescendo, and the moans of the horde grew deafening. The creature lunged, its massive body slamming into the shelves between us. I fired, the shot tearing into its chest and spraying blackened blood across the room. It didn't stop. Another shot, this one ripping through its shoulder. The creature snarled, its claws swiping wildly as it charged. I dove to the side, glass shards slicing into my palms as I hit the floor. The freezer creature was relentless, its movements quick and unpredictable despite its size. I fired again, the bullet tearing through its leg and sending it crashing to the ground. It writhed, its claws raking deep gouges into the floor as it tried to reach me. The howlers were closer now, their screams almost inside the building. The horde would be moments behind them. I had to move. I scrambled to my feet, bolting through the cafe and into the alley beyond. The screams of the howlers pierced the night, and the moans of the dead seemed to come from every direction. Ahead, a fire escape led to the roof of a nearby building. I climbed quickly, the metal rungs biting into my hands. Below, the alley swarmed with the infected, their decayed hands grasping at the air as they poured into the street. I reached the rooftop and dropped to my knees, gasping for air. From this vantage point, I could see the city laid out before me, a sea of decay and death. The howlers' cries echoed across the skyline, and the horde moved like a tide, relentless and unyielding. I had survived the night so far, but I wasn't out yet. The howlers were still hunting, and every step I took was another chance to make a sound. Silence was my only weapon, and it was a fragile one. The rooftop groaned beneath my boots as I crept along the edge, the moans of the horde below growing louder. Shadows danced across the crumbling cityscape, and somewhere in the distance, a howler's cry pierced the silence like shattered glass. I gritted my teeth and pressed forward, my hands gripping the rifle tightly. Every step felt like it could betray me, the gravel crunching faintly underfoot. I glanced back, catching sight of Lila's bloodied bag slung over my shoulder. Her memory clawed at me, but there was no time to mourn. Ahead, the path ended at another rooftop, a leap I wasn't sure I could make silently. But staying here wasn't an option. I crouched low, inhaled sharply, and sprang forward. My boots hit the opposite ledge with a muffled thud, and I rolled to absorb the impact. For a brief moment, silence reigned. Then I heard it. The tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, like bone on stone. I turned slowly, my stomach knotting. Across the rooftop, a howler crouched in the shadows, its elongated limbs folding unnaturally beneath it. Its hollow eyes gleamed faintly, locked on me with predatory intent. I froze, willing myself to stay calm. The howler tilted its head, sniffing the air. I knew what was coming, the scream that would bring the others. As its chest expanded, I raised my rifle and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the air, loud and sharp, and the howler's head snapped back as black ichor sprayed from its skull. It crumpled to the ground, twitching. I barely had time to breathe before the moans below swelled into a deafening chorus. The gunshot had done its job. The horde was coming. I ran, my boots pounding against the rooftop as the city came alive with movement. More howlers appeared, their screams echoing through the night and amplifying the chaos. The horde surged, a tidal wave of decay spilling into the streets. I spotted a fire escape ahead and bolted for it, my lungs burning. The metal ladder shook violently as I climbed, but it held. Reaching the alley below, I slipped into the shadows, the smell of rot thick in the air. The howlers were relentless, their cries slicing through the darkness like knives. One landed in the alley behind me, its grotesque form illuminated briefly by the moonlight. Its claws scraped against the concrete as it charged. I dove into a side door, slamming it shut just as the creature's claws raked the frame. Inside, the air was damp and foul, the room a maze of rusted machinery and broken crates. My flashlight flickered as I moved, the beam bouncing off the walls. The howler outside let out another scream, and the sound reverberated through the building. Moments later, the walls trembled as the horde descended. I moved deeper into the factory, marking my path with chalk as I went. Every turn felt like a gamble, the shadows stretching and twisting as if alive. The moans and howls grew closer, their chaotic symphony driving me forward. I found a staircase leading down and hesitated. The air below reeked of death, but it was my only option. I descended quickly, my boots barely brushing the steps. At the bottom, I entered a massive storage room filled with towering shelves. The faint light of my flashlight revealed claw marks gouged into the walls and floor, a grim reminder of what had happened here. The howlers didn't give me much time to think. They poured into the room from every direction, their movements frantic and jerky. I fired at the closest one, the shot ripping through its chest and sending it sprawling. Another lunged, its claws slashing my arm. Pain flared, but I swung the butt of my rifle into its face, the impact shattering bone. Black ichor splattered across my clothes as the creature crumpled. The horde was closing in, their moans drowning out the howlers' cries. I spotted a vent in the corner and sprinted for it, sliding inside just as a howler's claws raked the metal. The vent was narrow and suffocating, the air thick with dust and decay. I crawled as fast as I could, the sound of the horde pounding against the walls behind me. My chalk marks glowed faintly in the flashlight's beam, guiding me through the maze of metal. The howlers followed, their guttural growls echoing through the shaft. One caught up, its clawed hand gripping my ankle. I kicked wildly, the flashlight falling from my grasp and clattering ahead. The howler's grip tightened, its claws digging into my flesh. I twisted, pulling my knife from my belt, and drove it into the creature's face. Black fluid poured from the wound, and its grip faltered. I didn't stop to finish it off. I scrambled forward, my hands slick with sweat and blood. Finally, I reached an opening and tumbled out into an alley. The fresh air hit me like a slap, but the moans were still close. I staggered to my feet and bolted, weaving through the maze of ruined buildings. The The wall came into view, its towering gates a beacon of safety. I shouted for the guards, my voice hoarse. They opened the gate just enough to let me through, slamming it shut as the horde reached the perimeter. I collapsed against the wall, my chest heaving and my body trembling. Blood seeped from my wounds, mixing with the grime on my skin. I grabbed a piece of chalk and scrawled across the wall, Rule 18, silence is a weapon. Beneath it, I added, because one sound can cost you everything.